For decades, some of the darkest crimes in history remained unsolved, locked away in forgotten files while families waited for answers that never came. Time passed, detectives retired, witnesses died, and killers lived freely, believing they had escaped justice forever. But the truth has a strange way of surviving. With modern DNA technology, new investigative tools, and determined cold case teams, many murder mysteries that once seemed impossible to solve were finally cracked after 30, 40, even 50 years. These are the stories of patience, persistence, and justice delayed, but not denied. In 1968, 18-year-old Anne-Marie Burr vanished from her home in Tacoma, Washington. She had gone to bed early, but by morning she was gone without a trace. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, and no clear suspects. For decades, her family lived with unbearable uncertainty. In 2023, more than 55 years later, investigators finally named her killer after reviewing old evidence and witness statements. The man had died years earlier, but the truth finally came out, bringing long-awaited closure to a case that had haunted a family for more than half a century. In 1971, college student Rita Curran was brutally murdered in her Vermont apartment. Neighbors heard screams, but no one saw the killer. Police had no suspect, and the case quickly went cold. For 52 years, Rita's family waited for answers. In 2023, detectives used modern DNA genealogy to test preserved evidence from the crime scene. The DNA led to a man who had already died years earlier. Even though he never faced trial, Rita's family finally learned the truth about who had taken her life after more than 5 decades of silence. In 1974, 17-year-old Carla Walker was kidnapped from a car in Texas and later found murdered. At the time, investigators had little to work with, and the case faded into history. Her parents never stopped hoping. In 2019, 45 years later, forensic scientists tested old DNA evidence using advanced technology. The results matched Glenn McCurley, a man who had once been questioned but never arrested. He was finally charged, and Carla's family saw justice begin after nearly half a century of waiting. In 1979, the body of a young woman was found on the side of a road in Texas. She had no identification and no missing person report. For decades, she was known only as Orange Socks, named after the bright socks she was wearing. No one knew her real name or who had killed her. In 2019, 40 years later, genetic genealogy finally revealed her identity. She was Deborah Sue Jackson, a runaway teenager. Although her killer was already dead, Deborah finally got her name back, and her family finally learned what had happened to her after 4 decades of silence. In 1984, Helen Gale was murdered in England. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints, and no suspect. The case went cold almost immediately. For 35 years, nothing happened. In 2019, scientists tested old blood samples using modern DNA profiling. The results identified the killer, a man who had died years earlier. Although he never faced justice in court, Helen and his family finally learned the truth about who had taken her life after 3.5 decades. In 1986, Janet Ringe was found murdered in California. Police had DNA but no match. The killer disappeared, and the case remained unsolved for 30 years. In 2016, detectives reopened the case and sent the DNA for advanced testing using genealogy databases. The results identified a suspect who had lived freely for decades. He was arrested at the age of 72. After 30 years of silence, Janet's family finally heard the words they had waited for. The killer had been found. Her killer taunted police by sending letters, but still managed to stay hidden for 30 years. The case terrified the community and haunted investigators. In 2018, police tested DNA from one of the killer's letters using genetic genealogy. The DNA led to John D. Miller, a man who had lived quietly in the same town all along. He confessed, and after 3 decades, April's family finally received justice. In 1992, Patricia Otto disappeared in Wisconsin. For nearly 30 years, there were no clues and no answers. Her family believed she had simply vanished forever. In 2021, investigators tested DNA found on preserved evidence and matched it to a former coworker. He confessed to killing her and hiding her body. After almost 3 decades of silence, Patricia's remains were finally recovered, and her family finally had a place to mourn her properly. In 1965, Mary Shotwell Little disappeared after a night out with friends in Georgia. At first, police believed she had run away, but her burned car was later found, proving something terrible had happened. For more than 50 years, the case remained cold. In 2018, investigators reviewed old witness statements and evidence and identified a former coworker as the main suspect. Although he had already died, the truth about Mary's fate finally came out after more than half a century. In 1957, the body of a young boy was found in a box in Philadelphia. No one knew his name or how he had died. For 64 years, he was known only as the boy in the box. In 2022, genetic genealogy finally identified him as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Although his killer remains unknown, the child finally received his identity, and the world remembered him not as a mystery, but as a real boy who deserved justice. In 1975, the murder of young mother Sherry Rasmussen in California shocked the community. For decades, her husband believed a burglar had killed her. In 2009, more than 33 years later, DNA evidence finally revealed the truth. The killer was a police officer who had been obsessed with Sherry's husband. She was arrested and later convicted. After more than 3 decades, one of the most shocking betrayals in cold case history was finally exposed. These murder mysteries show us that time does not erase guilt. It only delays the moment when the truth comes out. Every case solved after 30 to 50 years is a reminder that even the smallest piece of forgotten evidence can one day become the key to justice. Families who never stopped believing are finally rewarded with answers, even if those answers come far too late. Behind every solved cold case is a story of patience, pain, and hope. Investigators who refuse to give up. Scientists who push technology forward. Parents who went to bed every night wondering if tomorrow would finally bring the truth. Justice may arrive slowly, but when it does, it changes everything. Some killers lived normal lives for decades, raising families, going to work, and blending into society, believing their crimes were buried forever. But the past never truly stays buried. DNA databases, genetic genealogy, and modern forensic science are now opening doors that were once locked forever. Murderers who once felt safe are now being found in their old age, sometimes arrested in front of neighbors who never suspected a thing. These stories are not just about crime. They are about memory, about refusing to forget the victims, about proving that every life matters, even decades later. When a cold case is solved, it is not just a legal victory, it is a human victory for every family that waited in silence for justice. As we come to the end of today's journey, take a moment to think about the people behind these stories. They were not just names in police files. They were sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, friends and parents whose lives were suddenly taken. For decades, their families lived with questions that had no answers, waking up every day hoping that someone somewhere would finally uncover the truth. These cases remind us that justice is not always fast and it is rarely easy. Sometimes it takes 30 years. Sometimes it takes 50, but the truth has a way of surviving. A single drop of blood, a forgotten fingerprint, an old letter, or a new technology can suddenly bring light into the darkest places. What once seemed impossible becomes real, and silence finally turns into answers. To every investigator who refused to give up, to every scientist who pushed technology forward, and to every family who never stopped believing, these victories belong to you. Because of your strength and patience, killers who thought they were safe were finally exposed, and victims who were once forgotten were finally heard. If these stories moved you, remember that there are still thousands of cold cases waiting for their moment of truth. Somewhere, another family is still waiting for closure, still hoping that one day the phone will ring with the words they have dreamed of hearing for years. We solved the case. Thank you for spending this time with us and honoring the memories of those who were lost. If you believe in justice and in the power of truth, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories that prove one powerful message. No matter how long it takes, justice never truly sleeps.